Good evening. It's about time I made another instructional video, and the one I am going to make now relates to passive farming and how you are going to get lucky with who you farm. Okay. Now there's a really easy way to spot which characters will all of a sudden get an upgrade. Now I'm referring to an upgrade in the form of the recent upgrade to Grandmaster Yoda. So he was a lead character, obviously, very important character, but he was a massive letdown. And I farmed him, and I geared him up as high as I could, and I got lucky when they buffed him. I all of a sudden had a major character, just waiting for a Zeta to be added. So it's really, this video is really about spotting those guys and how to get lucky. Now the easiest way to spot him is if the character has another version. Okay, so excuse me, if we look at Housewife's Choice Han Solo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versions of Han, right? And that's because in the Star Wars films there are many versions of Han Solo. Okay, there's the Han with the waistcoat, the cowboy Han that we all know and love. There's Stormtrooper Han and Veteran Han and Young Han, and then Captain Han, and there's probably, you know, my memory fails me, but there's probably another Han Solo in there somewhere. So it's unlikely that you know, Pit Raid Han over here is going to receive a buff. It's unlikely that Stormtrooper Han will receive a buff. It's very unlikely that these characters will receive a buff because there could be the possibility of another Han Solo coming in here. If we look at Mace, in contrast, Mace Windu doesn't have a Zeta, doesn't have any other versions of him in game. But what's important is that he doesn't have any other versions in film either. Now, of course, I'm referring simply to the cinema films, the 8 or 9 of them that they've made. I haven't read any books. I think I read the Mr. Men books when they were younger, but I haven't seen a Mr. Happy in here at all. But certainly within the main Star Wars cinema franchise, there are no other versions of Mace Windu. You know, there's no Mace Windu on the dark side. There's no Mace Windu wearing jeans. You know, he's the same guy, the same clothes. And spoiler alert, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When he gets killed, that's it. You know, there's no kind of ghost Mace Windu that we could expect. So is Mace Windu lined up for a buff? Yes, most certainly he is. He doesn't have any Zeta abilities as it stands. He is a fleet captain, and within the lore of Star Wars, he's reasonably important. He's a member of the Jedi Council. I'm aware from conversations with other people that in terms of Star Wars overall, if you do include the books, he's actually quite a hefty character. And of course this game does factor in all of Star Wars. It doesn't just go for the films. So yes, there is going to be a buff on Mace Windu at some point. There can't not be. So passively farming Mace Windu is a good idea. It is a good idea, because he's going to get an upgrade at some point, whether it's this week, next week, or next year. Who knows, right? The same thing for it's a trap, Admiral Ackbar. Right, does he have a Zeta on there? No, he doesn't. So no Zeta on him, I don't think. Nope. No Zeta on him. And only one version of him. There's only one Admiral Ackbar. Even in the newer films, it's still good old Admiral Ackbar. So he's in line, not for another version, right, which would keep him at this level, but he is there ready for an upgrade. And if we scroll through some of these characters, it's quite easy now, understanding this, how to identify which ones you're going to farm, right? Passively, again, like I said, obviously there are characters that you need to unlock other characters. So yeah, look at Vader. There's only one Darth Vader. There's only one version of Darth Vader. There's no other version of Darth Vader. That's how he looks. That's how he is. You know, Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader, and they've already got him there. There is the potential, of course, to have, you know, Darth Vader without his hat on, or there's the potential of, you know, Luke's father appearing all of a sudden. But this is unlikely because they wouldn't make very good characters. So Darth Vader is either going to continually get buffed, or remain the same or get adjusted. There's going to be no second version. So if you don't have him leveled, level him up, right? Grandmaster Yoda, we only have 2 Yodas, but then there are only 2 Yodas. There's the Yoda that we see here, the Grandmaster, who zips around and fights Dooku and everything, and then there's the Hermit one hiding on the planet. There isn't, we don't have a young Yoda, right? There might be a young Yoda. You know, I don't know what Disney have planned. We could have a film next year called The Tales of Young Yoda, you know, where he's a rebellious young green, I don't know what his species is, I'm afraid. He's a rebellious young green Jedi who gets into trouble and falls on the wrong side of the tracks, gradually comes to terms with his own dark side thoughts, turning to the light side, nearly falls in love, but of course can't fall in love because love is for other people and heroes can't ever fall in love. And then goes on to become the hero that we know today. That's a possibility, you know, knowing Disney, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely. So Grandmaster Yoda got a buff. Hermit Yoda's already pretty good. We're not going to see another version of Yoda, so they could add further Zetas to these 2 characters because they're important. You know, as far as I'm aware, there's only one version of R2. There's only one R2-D2, so this character is going to get a buff. Ezra, there's only one version of him, right? So he's going to get a buff. Lando, it's not going to get a buff, right? There's this version of Lando. We've got a young Lando now, right? The rapper chap who was in the recent movie. So we've got 2 Landos, and there's the possibility of a further Lando Calrissian, and that is the Lando Calrissian with the kind of the bounty hunter brown hat on, right? We haven't seen him yet, so we're not expecting a buff for Lando here. He's not going to get a Zeta. Instead, we'll get another Lando. All right. Same for Ben. Okay. Now I've got 2 Kenobis here. I've got General Kenobi, who doesn't have a Zeta, really is due for one because he's such an awesome character, but then he may become a bit overpowered. I'm not really sure about that. And then we've got Obi-Wan, who I don't have a Zeta for, but he has the Zeta possibility. But there's also the young Ben from the movies with what's the Scottish chap's name? I've forgotten. I want to say Ethan Hawke, but that's not Ethan Hawke at all, is it? I've forgotten his name anyway, the guy that played young Ben. So we're going to see young Ben at some point, and we will see young Ben before we see a buff for these 2 Bens, okay? And that's how it works, okay? That's how it works. There's lots of... Princess Leia isn't going to get a buff, right? They're going to bring out another we don't have Bikini Leia, okay? Even though Bikini Leia she was useful on the ship, right? She killed some guys on the ship, so she's got some combat abilities. But we will see buffs for Mace, because there's one version of him. We could see a buff for Jin, for example, because there's one version of her. We could see a buff for Wedge, because there's only one version of him. But we are not going to see a buff for Princess Leia. We're not going to see a buff for Lando. You know, we're not going to see a buff for this Leia. We're not going to see a buff for this Luke. There's 2 Lukes in the game. There's Luke Skywalker, and there's, you know, where is he up here? There's Commander Luke. We don't have a Jedi Luke, right? So we don't have the black shirt, metal hand. No, we don't have that guy, right? We don't have that Jedi Luke. He's coming. We don't have the old, you know, monster milk drinking, booby sucking, sad Luke. Right, what a shame they did that. I mean, what a bloody shame. What a shame. I quite like those movies, you know. I quite like the concept. I don't want to put a spoiler out in case you haven't seen it, but that's unlikely that you haven't. But I thought the way that they kind of handled that whole thing towards the end of those films was really quite good. But having him angry and drinking, I mean, that was just Sorry, I've digressed, but they really shouldn't have done that. But we're not going to see a further buff for Commander Luke. We're not going to see a further buff for Farm Boy Luke, because we are yet to see Jedi Luke, and we are yet to see Old Man Luke. So, if you want to get lucky with a farm, and you want to passively farm somebody, I would certainly suggest Mace, if you're not already doing it, because he's a fairly senior character with one version. There's a possibility that Dooku could get a buff as well, because he's quite important. I don't think he's a priority in terms of you know, he's not high up on the buffs list if they have a list. But you know, don't passively farm K2SO, don't passively farm Jedi Consular, you know, don't passively farm Cassian Andor or Bistan. You know, these guys aren't gonna, you know, they have a purpose because they fit in a Rogue One team, you know, and that's good, it's great, but they're not gonna all of a sudden become A1 characters. You know, it's just not gonna happen. You know, Darth Maul, he could easily get a buff. What does he got on him? He's got no Zeta there. He should have, I think he's got one here. He's got one Zeta here. You know, Darth Maul, as unimpressive as the films with him were in, or film with him in, look at that, he's a beast, you know. And that double lightsaber, when we all didn't know that double lightsabers existed, you know, if you're under 20 and you kind of watched this guy when you were a kid, there was a time when we didn't even know this was possible, right? We didn't even know that a double lightsaber was possible. And when we saw the trailers with this guy and he had a double lightsaber, it was like, damn, you know, it was like, damn, look at this guy, like, who's Vader? Of course, the film was awful, terrible soundtrack, the score was just awful, just overpowered everything, and it was a film about blooming trade. I mean, Jesus, it was awful. It was just so awful. But he could certainly get a buff. Look at that, he's a beast. He could certainly get a buff. Alright, well, I hope this has been useful. Scroll through your characters, decide who the important characters are. If there's only one version of them, there's a chance that they could get a buff. If there are multiple versions of them, it's unlikely that they're going to get a buff. And that's basically it for this video.